Why was it that Count Dooku actively disliked and hated General Grievous's lightsaber style and thought it a mockery of greater swordsmanship? Greetings, Acolytes of the Galaxy, and welcome back to our archives. General Grievous was known as one of the most prolific Jedi killers of his era, if not of all time. During the Clone Wars, not many Jedi had proper rivals in saber-to-saber combat, which caused the practice to be mostly left to the wayside in favor of blast deflection. Which is an understandable change considering the current galactic climate of open warfare. However, since many of the Jedi neglected their dueling skills, they would be utterly destroyed when they came against a Dark Jedi or Sith that had decent dueling capabilities. But of course, in the case of General Grievous, many Jedi were at a complete loss of what to do against a foe of his caliber. Though despite his terrifying reputation, Grievous's own teacher Darth Tyrannus remained unimpressed with the cyborg's dueling skills. In fact, it's more likely to say that Count Dooku hated the way that Grievous used his lightsabers. This seems to be a rather strange issue indeed, seeing as how Dooku, who was the one who trained Grievous in the first place, and taught him all that he knew. So let's open up yet another holocron, Acolytes, and once again peer into the psyche of Dooku to see why he held so much contempt for the General's fighting style. To get a few things out of the way, we can go ahead and just say that Dooku didn't like Grievous as a person in the first place. He thought of the cyborg as nothing more than a disgusting creature and a tool. A monster which was created for the sole purpose of being the villain and the fall guy of the atrocities of the Clone Wars once the battle concluded. Beyond even this, he despised General Grievous for being a cyborg, as Dooku held a certain prejudice against mixing organic beings and machines, deeming this as unnatural. Another thing we have to take into account is Dooku's impossibly high standard for lightsaber combat in the first place. He is a traditional duelist, and has very strong opinions and stances about people's forms in general, deeming mostly all of them to be inferior. This is the same person who said that Mace Windu was a bad duelist because Vaapad was, in his words, sloppy. With all of that taken into consideration though, there is still something very specific about Dooku, and why the styles that Grievous used were particularly egregious. Like we stated, the Sith duelist poured hours of his life into training the droid general into the perfect Jedi killing machine, at the behest of Lord Sidious, his master. When we think about that, one might think that if Dooku were going to waste his time doing something like this, he would want it to be absolute perfection, but Grievous was anything but perfection. In fact, quite the opposite. We can attribute the main reasons for Dooku's contempt to just a few distinct factors, so let's start with the first. Count Dooku already had a certain distaste for those who used multiple lightsabers at once, and many powerful Jedi and Sith would agree with Dooku and hold this as the tried and true. If you asked almost any classically trained duelist, they will almost always make some comment about how multiple blades are outright inferior. Dooku, Vader, and Plagueis all held this belief. Vader stated that with the power of the dark side, one blade is all you would ever need. Jedi duelists usually didn't approve of the use of multiple lightsabers or saber staffs, as they saw it as being overly aggressive and too eager to enter combat. As peacekeepers, they idealized the use of one saber to complete the job. Of course though, this wasn't an official rule, but a sort of unspoken understanding when not in times of war. Darth Plagueis openly disliked the use of saber staffs as he considered it to be the weapon of a barbarian, and Dooku held the exact same sentiment. When Dooku saw somebody use multiple lightsabers, he called it cheap, a way for those with inferior skill to try to compensate against someone better than they were. Not to mention when one duels, in many circumstances, their blade strikes won't be as clean, as precise, as if they only had a single lightsaber. Dooku valued precision above all else, which is understandable considering his obsession with Form 2 Makashi. This is also the reason why he hated saber staffs, because like we've stated a moment ago, he saw the weapon as barbaric and just a way to hack one's opponent to death, rather than defeating them on a basis of skill and pride. This is why he stated that Maul and Savage were barely more than animals. To pour salt on Dooku's wound though, Grievous used not 2, but 4 lightsabers at once, collecting each one off of dead Jedi bodies, which Dooku also saw and deemed this as heathenistic behaviors. The second point that Dooku made is that although he is a Sith, he did believe in a fair fight. Segueing from our previous point, Dooku cares about the honor in a fight, when he crosses sabers with someone, he intends to dismantle them with pure skill alone and no tricks. The testament of a warrior in the Force is someone who can use their powers or skill to best the other. This was Dooku, and this was how Dooku often proved his superiority in combat over other Jedi. In fact, it was likely the most important thing to him. Grievous, though, uses 4 lightsabers, blasters, and many cheap tricks when fighting Jedi in order to compensate for not having the Force. Dooku hated this, as to him, it undermined everything that was sacred about fighting a worthy opponent, which brings us neatly to our final point. Grievous could not use the Force, which Dooku saw as an affront to the sanctity of lightsaber combat, the very cornerstone of one worthy to pick up the blade. This fact is pretty self-explanatory, and is the very reason why Sidious had to practically force Dooku to train Grievous under a direct command. Above everything else, Dooku couldn't stand that Grievous, a non-Force sensitive, was being trained with the lightsaber, and was besting Jedi off of nothing else than pure mechanical enhancements. This disgusted Dooku beyond all reason. He had to teach this creature to be able to kill those who trained their entire lives in the ways of the Force, with nothing but cybernetic enhancements and tricks. The way Grievous spun the lightsabers like a buzzsaw, as his mechanical arms entangled his enemies. This is something that Dooku barely could stand. He viewed Grievous as undignified, a monster, and more than this, a monster wielding a weapon that meant more to Dooku than perhaps the lives of most of the people he would ever know. A sacred weapon to the Sith Lord. Without the Force, one can't truly connect with a lightsaber or reach the full potential of what it means to wield such a weapon, to be worthy to even touch it, much less properly cross blades with a classically trained Jedi. The worst part about all of this is that Grievous almost always won. I wouldn't be surprised if Dooku would actually be happy if a Jedi managed to kill and defeat Grievous. It would probably give the Sith Lord some peace of mind. And yet, it wasn't until after his death did a Jedi finally kill the droid monstrosity. Dooku attempted to best train Grievous in the typical ways of precision and calculated strikes, but it fell on deaf ears and never worked. Grievous was from a primitive world. He already had the idea of how to use weapons, which was with nothing but sheer and utter brutality. Dooku viewed combat and warfare with the lightsaber as an art, something beautiful. For someone who was trained to slip an opponent's guard and dispatch with cunning skill and deadly accuracy, Dooku was forced to watch all of his beliefs about the proper way of dueling be chewed up and spat out directly into his face by a glorified trash compactor. This even caused Dooku to despise the Jedi even more, who he had been warning for decades that their lightsaber skills were not up to par. The entire war was Dooku's way of showing the Jedi just how far they had fallen, that they could now be bested by a droid. And what made this even worse is, in some sadistic way, Dooku was rooting for them, silently hoping that they would come to their senses and best the beast that was General Grievous. Anyway, my friends and acolytes, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown and analysis on exactly why Dooku absolutely hated Grievous's form. What are your thoughts on Dooku's respect and ceremony and even the sanctity of a lightsaber duel, and how Grievous literally represented the opposite of all of these beliefs? As always, my friends, thank you for visiting our archives. May the Force be with you, and I hope to see you soon.